On this seventh Sunday of Ordinary Time, Jesus speaks into the heart of every day and our ordinary lives with all our joys and with all our pains and hurts and brokenness. As we near the end of the Sermon on the Plain from the Gospel of Luke, we hear, "Give, and gifts will be given to you, a good measure, packed down, and overflowing will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in return be measured out to you." These two statements summarize what Bishop Robert Barron calls the law of the gift. This law is the inner dynamic of generosity. It's simply the way generosity works. The giver is enriched for the giving in the measure that the gift is given. This is not about selfishness and how we get gifts, but it's just the very reality that we are rewarded when we make gifts to others, when we give of ourselves. It's the way that governs the way of giving. If this is true when we give to those we love, for those for whom it is easy, what about giving when it is hard? If it takes more to give, will not the return be even greater when we love those who are the most difficult to love? We might stop now and take a moment. I would ask each of you to think of someone in your life for whom your giving would be hard. For those of us that have been around a while, that's not hard to do. Perhaps it might even seem an impossible relationship. Someone who hates you, someone who has been willingly and has willingly hurt you, someone you might think of as your enemy. This is who Jesus is calling us toward today. Think of that person, sisters and brothers. And because we have a lot of spaces, think of them sitting next to you right now. That person who is the most difficult relationship in your life and in your world, sitting next to you right now. In all of the Gospels, Jesus never speaks of men and women as his enemies. There are those with whom he argues, those with whom he disagrees, but time after time we see him going to those who we would think of as his enemies. Roman soldiers, sinners, liars, cheats, Pharisees, scribes, hypocrites of all kinds. And what does he do for each? He gives not only welcome and hospitality, but genuine love. Jesus teaches us today and calls us to something that will require incredible courage and charity on our part. Jesus calls us deeper into his image today. There's a lot in that reading. Perhaps we can reduce it to just a few statements. Do good to those who hate you. Give to everyone who asks. Love your enemies and do good to them. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. These are not shallow nor are they empty words. Just the last sentence is a call to imitate Jesus in his steadfast love for our enemies. The willingness to enter the chaos of those who are opposed to us, to accompany them. We can go to our first reading. There is David with his rough and violent cousin Abishai. They are standing over Saul, the despot king, who is seeking to kill David. David was anointed to be the future king. He was a member of Saul's court. There was love between the two. But Saul desires to kill David, 3,000 men to David's poor 300. And we're told the Lord put David and Abishai before Saul, who is asleep. Abishai there with his spear, ready to thrust him through. And yet David's refusal of that violence, of that killing, is rewarded with the gift of God's protection for this one who would be king. Sisters and brothers, like David, how many times in our lives, how many times in our journeys have we stood over an enemy with a spear in our hand? It may have been the spear of our words. It may have been the spear of our anger. It may have been the spear of our distrust. It may have been the spear of our wealth or our poverty, ready to strike the one who was our enemy. We're called today, sisters and brothers, to supernatural charity. We heard in the second reading from Paul that the natural comes first and the spiritual second. That in our natural lives, our reactions of justice are the logic and reason of harm me, I'll harm you. But we're called to go so far beyond that by the grace that God provides to us. In the sacrament of baptism, in confirmation, strengthened for us. In the sacrament of reconciliation, restored in us. In the Eucharist, nourished in us. That supernatural grace to live beyond, to live into mercy. We live, sisters and brothers, in a world that is imperfect, filled with imperfect nations, imperfect peoples, imperfect families, to be sure, and imperfect friends and co-workers. A world in which we don't have to work very hard to find someone we might call an enemy. Theologian John Rizzo, in his masterful book, Christian Moral Life, reminds us that God created us and our world perfectly imperfect. Perhaps his story will help us. Dominican priest Father Tom Petrie tells this story. Professor Joseph Ratzinger, this is before he was Pope Benedict, he was a university professor, and he had a doctoral student who had worked years working on his dissertation. He had finished his dissertation, and he went to Joseph Ratzinger and he said, Professor Ratzinger, can I rewrite the first 2 chapters since I've learned so much since when I first started this journey? And Ratzinger wouldn't allow him. He said, you need courage to live with the imperfect. Sisters and brothers, what a message for us, that we need courage to live with the imperfections in ourselves, in our world, and in others. Do we have the courage of David to turn from the violence of our minds and hearts? The invitation of this week, as we think about that person who's sitting beside us today, as we think about that personal enemy, that broken relationship, that hurt that is so deep, the invitation this week is with the easy and the hard, the ungrateful and the wicked. Can we live the law of the gift? Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed down, overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you.
Please like, subscribe, and comment below. God bless you.